Well, good afternoon, all. Thank you so much for your patience. My name is Stephenetta Harmon. I am a former editor-in-chief for Spokesman-Recorder. I am also a contributor, and we called this town hall together today, more of a discussion, I would say, to get a bit more perspective on what's happening as it relates to the state of Black Minnesota right now. Literally, we are experiencing a pandemic within a pandemic. We're in the midst of a global health crisis with COVID-19. We are in the eye of the storm, I would say, of systemic police violence in the wake of George Floyd's killing. Organizers have made history with protests in every state in the country and across the globe. And Minnesota basically is ground zero right now. And 2 weeks of protests, we've seen 4 officers fired, charged and stripped of their licenses, buildings burned, fences raised, and a collective people in pain. And while the fires are no longer burning in the streets, we are definitely, as an activist from the Twin Cities Coalition for Justice for Jamar said, the fires are still burning in our hearts, and we're a place at now what? Where do we go from here? We have with us today Nekima Levy Armstrong, founder of Racial Justice Network and licensed attorney. We have Jaylani Hussein, executive director of CAIR Minnesota. Oluchi Omeoga with Black Visions Collective, Andrea Jenkins, city council member, and Mel Reeves, who is an MSR community editor and longtime human rights activist. And so thank you all for tuning in, jumping in. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And the first thing I want you to tell me is where you are in this conversation right now, and the work that you're doing. I'm going to start with Nekima. So let me see here. Unmute you.
I'm now unmuted.
Awesome.
Thank you for having me. Thanks to the Spokesman-Recorder for bringing the information that our community needs to the table. Where I am in this discussion, of course, is frustrated that it has taken so long for people who are in positions of power to take the Black community's concerns seriously surrounding the Minneapolis Police Department, along with many other systems that have underserved us. So I'm here, I'm frustrated, but I am still on fire for justice. And I'm glad to participate in today's conversation.
Thank you. Andrea Jenkins, can I have you share where you are in this conversation right now, Councilmember Jenkins?
Thank you, Stephenetta, and thank you, Minneapolis Spokesman and Recorder, for inviting me to be a part of this conversation and to share just, some of my insights and concerns with broader African-American community. I really do appreciate the Minneapolis Spokesman. I read it regularly for several years. I've even on occasion contributed myself. But I'm as a city council member, I'm deeply engaged in trying to respond to all the things that are happening in our community. You mentioned, multiple pandemics. So we were in response mode to the coronavirus and really trying to make sure that we're centering Black and brown communities in the midst of that. Our very limited resources that we were able to use for gap funding, a little bit over $5 million, was really targeted towards Black and brown communities, and all of those resources. And then we, the virus of white supremacy and racism reared its head in the midst of this global virus pandemic in the form of Derek Chauvin and 3 other police officers, former police officers who were responsible for the death of George Floyd, and then the subsequent actions and rightful protests that happened after that. And so, you know, I'm working on creating a space for public safety conversations. I'm working on economic response to the devastation and destruction that has impacted mostly Black and brown businesses in Minneapolis and in St. Paul. And how do we rebuild those businesses and make those communities whole? And thinking about how do you know, in many ways, this becomes an opportunity for us to not only reimagine our police department, which myself and my colleagues have been have publicly stated that we're committed to visioning a new way of public safety that ensures that everybody is safe and not always having a response of a person with a gun to every single issue that arises in our community. But also, how do we rebuild our communities to be responsive to the needs of Black and brown communities in terms of housing and education and access to healthcare and all of those things. So the broad, long range, the immediate, you know, how do we get the garbage up out of the street? How do we make sure that people are getting hand sanitizers and masks and all of those things? And I'm so grateful for everybody on this call who has been doing that in community and really reaching out and making sure that the community has what it needs. And certainly not everything, but you know, we need to be responding to the food shortages that are in our communities now. And so I'm on the ground, I'm doing whatever is necessary to make our communities work.
Thank you so much. I'm going to now ask Jaylani Hussein with CAIR. I'm sorry, you cannot see me here and there. To join in with this conversation. Where are you right now in your work with CAIR Minnesota?
Well, first of all, I just wanted to again appreciate, as others have, of the Minnesota Spokesman-Recorder, to the coverage, to the amazing work that all of you have been doing. You know, one of the challenges that we are facing right now is also telling the real story of exactly what is happening. And so I hope many of you who are tuning in today can support the oldest Black newspaper in Minnesota that is still in the middle of telling the story of the Black experience here. You know, I think CAIR Minnesota, you know, we're part of the larger coalition of civil rights organizations here in Minnesota. And this is a moment, just like the other moments we've had in our time here in Minnesota, where we have an opportunity to bring on real change. And, you know, it's extremely frustrating in this moment right now that we are seeing the death of George Floyd being looked at from a narrow lens, and understanding how what happened was an entire system that has been doing this for quite a number of years, and it's part of the history of the DNA of this country, and so just kind of really being vulnerable, but also recognizing to telling the truth, because we have a moment here in Minnesota. We did not choose this moment. This moment chose us, and we have an opportunity to fix something that has not been fixed, and that is a system that is continuously hurting, killing, and taking advantage of people of color in this country, and the police force that really is the brutal force of this system that we saw torture and execute a human being in our own community, and just standing up and recognizing the failures that we've had, because there have been so many George Floyds that never had this specific moment, so really just recognizing the moment, understanding that we have an ability to really make true change, and focusing on that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jaylani. Now I'm going to ask Oluchi the same question. Where are you right now in your work as it relates to protests, and the state of systemic violence in the community?
Yeah, I thought you were gonna ask where I was. Literally, south side of Minneapolis.
Right?
Hey y'all, my name is Oluchi. I use pronouns. I am a core team member and co-founder of Black Visions. And with Black Visions, we're quite simply asking and working with city council members and city members as well for the defunding of the Minneapolis Police Department. And explicitly understanding that the police are part of the issue but are not the whole issue, right? We have to also understand that the judicial branch also upholds what we see when we see anti-Blackness and racism. We have to understand that the state and national politics also reaffirm racism and anti-Blackness. So understanding that what we can work on now, the time that we have now is to actually defund the Minneapolis Police Department and actually build something that's community-led and community-focused and community-centered. So how do we actually take who's most marginalized, who's most oppressed, and actually put them into the center of those conversations when we talk about safety, when we talk about community responsibility, right, and community accountability. And I think one thing that we saw when the protests were happening in the first week is we saw models of that. When the National Guard came through and terrorized us, right, we saw our block, for example, my block specifically on 18th Avenue, we had like a meeting that came together and said, we don't want white supremacists in this neighborhood. We don't want the National Guard in this neighborhood. How are we going to keep each other safe? So our job right now is to let people understand that they have the autonomy of safety in their communities, and we actually don't need the police in order to reinstate that, right? And as Council Vice President, actually, not just council member, but Council Vice President, Andrea Jenkins said, was like, how do we then reinvest those resources that we're using for the Minneapolis Police Department, which is more than housing, more than education, more than healthcare, more than a lot of social services that we have, and reinvest those into housing, into jobs, and into healthcare, so that folks have the ability to be more self-reliant, more autonomous, right? So those are the couple of things that we're working on in this moment, and I will let Mel Reeves, take it away.
Welcome, Mel Reeves. He's the MSR community editor, as well as a long time human rights activist within this community.
I missed the first that you asked me where we at to.
Oh yes. Oh, I'm sorry. I did not unmute myself as proper. Technology.
That's okay. Where we're at is a hopeful period. I've been saying to people that George Floyd is going to be a marker in people's lives. I've saying to folks who are sitting on the sideline that it's not going to look very good later on, because people are going to ask you, where were you when George Floyd got killed? Were you in the streets when George Floyd got killed? When he's murdered? This is an important time because, as everybody's observed by now, the vast overwhelming majority of folks that are out in the street all over this country, and then you think about the world, especially think of Europe, have been white. And what it's saying is that white people are waking up and they recognize what happened to George Floyd was something that was inhumane, and people are reclaiming their humanity, right? And so, I've opposed this system for a long time. This is making me look good because for a very, very, very long time, everybody knows that I've been opposed to this social, political, economic system called capitalism. And I believe that it is not believe. I know that is the reason why we're here struggling with police violence. So I'm hopeful because people need to be told. What's fascinating about this is, the activists get out in front and say, we got to keep protesting, we got to keep fighting. When they charged, before they charged the cop, they said, you got to get in the street, otherwise they're not going to charge. They gave us one cop. We kept saying, well, you got to get in the street if we're going to get them all charged. Folks got in the street, and now they're in the street without any prompting. You know why? Because they understand that they cannot trust the system. Think about that. We live in a system, right, that, they lock folks up every day. But when it comes to the people who actually are supposed to keep law and order, we've got to beg, we got to cajole, we got to use extra legal means in order to get justice. To me, that's a system that has to be overturned. Like I think somebody was talking earlier, Sister Andrea was talking about the double pandemic. So these things are showing us that, especially as Black folks, since the other pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic, exposed the system again, exposed that it's left us as most vulnerable to that pandemic. And we're also most vulnerable to the other pandemic of police violence. So to me, it just makes sense that we begin to look at this moment and talk about how we can organize so we don't have to come back to this. I think it's time to make long-standing change. I mean, real change. If the police are going to be violent, then why do we need the police? I think we need to eliminate the police as we know and work that out, whatever that means. But we cannot continue to do what we're doing right now, right? We don't have health care. Speaking of health care for all, every other developed nation has health care. We have an opportunity now. The elections are coming up. I'm going to say something really crazy, Stephenetta. But people have been talking about it. It's time for a third party. We had Joe Biden say to Black people that, hey, you ain't Black if you don't vote for me. And I was like, okay, I can roll with that. So what you got, man? What are you offering? Joe Biden didn't offer us anything. I'm still waiting for him to at least make an empty promise. He hasn't done that. That means that he really, and the Democratic Party really sees Black community as suckers. Malcolm X said that we put them first and they put us last. And I'm going to end with this. Malcolm said, listen, this system can't produce what we want. We're going to have to be real about it. We are going to have to roll up our sleeves and create the thing we want. Because Malcolm said, this system cannot produce, this unjust, immoral system cannot produce justice and equality, cannot do it. Malcolm made the point, reinforced it by saying, a chicken can only produce a chicken egg. He said, a chicken can only produce another chicken. He said, if a chicken produced a duck egg, you would call that a revolutionary chicken.
Well, we don't really want another chicken at this point. What I'm hearing from everyone on this panel right now is that we need actual change. We need something that goes beyond reform. But what does that really look like for the community right now? What does that mean to us? Right now, it's in the air when people talk about, defunding the police. The questions are like, oh, we're getting rid of the police station or the police. And we get that that's not really what's going to happen at this moment. But we do want to know what does real racial justice look like for us? What are some actionable items that we can see coming forth? Is it those recommendations? Is it something else that helps us to understand success as we are marching and moving through these streets? And I would love for Nekima to chime in on that.
Sure. Okay. So in terms of what real racial justice looks like, I think the first step in what's happening right now is making sure that our elected officials understand nothing about us without us. I have seen things on CNN and some of these other national news stations that we haven't even been told in our local community in terms of what's been happening. Our recommendations have not been elicited from the people who are making these decisions. It feels like a lot is being done in haste, which only re-traumatizes our community over and over and over again. We're already suffering under the weight of oppression. We're bearing the brunt of the folks in positions of power, their failure to do anything over the last several years. This has been going on for decades. And we're still being left behind. So while I want to be hopeful in terms of this being a turning point, I'm looking at the evidence that's in front of me, and it's hard for me to be hopeful that the system can produce the changes, even with the so-called overhaul and all the things being proposed. If we're not listening to the voices specifically of Black people and other communities of color, we're just replicating the same problems over and over again and giving it a new face. The people who helped get us into this situation will never be able to get us out. It's just not possible. The community knows what we need. For example, when our community came under attack in North Minneapolis against white supremacists, burning down many of our essential businesses and services, we had no one to rely upon other than community members. And so Leslie Redmond, who is the NAACP president, and other members of the community, about 30 of them, came together and they formed a community patrol. And literally night after night after night, they stand up through the night, sometimes having to be armed to protect the Black business corridor in North Minneapolis and to protect our people. And they're not receiving adequate support for what they're doing. This is just a grassroots response to a systemic failure. And over again, as Black people with having to live under the oppression within this system, we're having to create grassroots responses because the people who are making the decisions are not listening to us. And by the time they finally get an inkling of what we're talking about, it's a worldwide catastrophe. That should not continue to happen. So if our elected officials are serious about turning this moment into something sustainable to create lasting change, they need to start by listening to impacting communities, taking our concerns more seriously and engaging us before the rest of the world knows what they're planning. Because they're certainly not going to get our buy-in if they haven't done the boots on the ground work to engage our people about what's necessary. Beyond that, I want to see West Broadway actually turn into a real Black business corridor. We have a small number of Black businesses on West Broadway, but many of the businesses are not owned by Black people. I can't walk into the beauty supply and see a Black face who actually owns that beauty supply. That's a problem. And that's just one example of a business that could create jobs for our community, that could ensure that our dollar stays in the Black community instead of leaving in seconds. Those kinds of things help build an infrastructure that allow us to protect ourselves and allow us to be strengthened against everything that we're up against. So that is a part of what racial justice looks like to me.
Thank you, Nekima. And as you mentioned, Leslie Redmond with the NAACP president, she has actually just joined in the conversation as well. I would love for you, welcome Wesley, thank you so much for tuning in, to share the work that you are doing right now within the community and what racial justice looks like to you. So let me get you. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Hey, everyone. Grace and peace. Grace and peace. Sorry, it's a hectic time. First, I just always want to pay tribute to the Black women who have come before me and whose shoulders I stand on. And one of them is on the phone, Nekima Levy Armstrong, who I really respect and appreciate, who is always showing her love and support for the community and does not get half the praise and recognition that I believe that she deserves. You know, when we start talking about equity, a part of what it looks like is uplifting Black women and their voices and not co-opting their movements. I think that what we're seeing a lot of, as Nekima just talked about, is, you know, immediate grassroots solutions to systemic failures. And even before everything that we've been seeing right now with after the murder of George Floyd, you know, I was out in a parking lot with Nekima when they were passing out masks because of a result of COVID-19. And so a lot of the time we're seeing policies put in place, like there was a policy that everyone had to wear a mask, but there was no support and services to ensure that everyone had a mask, right? So then we put curfews in place, but are we making sure that people have rides home, right? Or that they even know that a curfew is going on, and then who's protecting our community while the curfew is going on. And so that's some of the results that we started to do, getting people to make sure young people knew the curfew existed, getting them ride homes, and then making sure that we were patrolling communities that were not being protected. Our community continues to suffer at the hands of domestic terrorism, white supremacy, and enough is enough. You know, the National NAACP is saying we are done dying, and we couldn't agree more. We have a lot of respect and appreciation for our first African-American police chief, Chief Arredondo. Every time I speak, I try to make sure that I lift him up, because I don't know if people really understand the the blessing that we have here in Minnesota having him. And I attribute a lot of that to 5 years ago, Jamar Clark, God rest his soul, his murder at the hands of Minneapolis Police Department and the 18-day occupation at the 4th Precinct is what really sparked a lot of the change that we're seeing right now. I think that we are headed in a good direction, but as Nekima mentioned earlier, this cannot be rushed. For me, I constantly think about the 13th Amendment and our quote unquote abolition of slavery, yet Black people are still in bondage in America. And I think because sometimes we're so anxious to get a win, we'll take a symbolic fake win. And I'm interested in a real win that actually leads to Black people's humanities being recognized and being upheld. I think that not only is it going to be about policy, but it's going to be about resources being poured into the Black community so that we can save ourselves. Right now, we're actually working on making the impromptu patrol and protection that we created sustainable and actually creating a business model that can be utilized not only here in Minnesota, but I think that it'll be beneficial all over the United States and potentially the world, where people from the community are actually able to protect and build up their own communities and work in collaboration with police and city officials. Even in the middle of all of this is going on, we still recognize this is an election year. So we are still pushing to make sure people are registered to vote, making sure voter education and census, because this is a part of white supremacy, right? Distracting us and making us not realize that there's still local politics going on, national politics going on. And if we're not at the table, we are on the menu. And so for us, it's been a lot of dividing and conquering and making sure that we're part of conversations and making sure that our voices are heard, like even working in collaboration with the ACLU. They're filing a lawsuit to make sure absentee ballots, people don't have to have witnesses. We are going to be doing on Friday a community memorial, which the Spokesman-Recorder should definitely be at. It's going to be at Shallow Temple International Ministries at 6 p.m. So I encourage you all to come out. We're also working on a private event specifically geared towards young people on Saturday. And if anybody's specifically interested, they can reach out to me directly. And again, the Spokesman-Recorder, you all should definitely be there covering that event as well. So yeah, it's just so many forms of activation. Black people are doing what we have always done, which is having to activate and save ourselves.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Leslie, for giving us that necessary update on actual on the ground actions outside of the protests that we can see that our communities are still working and moving forward. And as we're talking about this pivot, you know, we're still marching and we're still protesting and, you know, but there's actual work that's still being done right now in terms of recommendations to change the police system, to bring resources to the community. And I would love, Jaylani, for you to jump in on this part of the conversation. Where is CAIR right now in that work in terms of recommendations, in terms of actionable items? We're talking a lot about overviews, and I would love to get into actionable right now.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
There we go. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So, you know, we had just a press conference a couple of days ago. There's a coalition of groups, including Communities United Against Police Brutality, Coalition for Twin Cities Coalition for Jamar Clark, and Racial Justice Network, and others that have presented a document that had 44 specific recommendations that we can act upon right now, and those can be found on the website of Communities United Against Police Brutality. And these are just the first step, but these are ideas that have been researched and as well as been discussed in many times. In fact, all of them have been presented on a number of occasions. And I want to just uplift that, you know, in this moment right now, if we don't, you know, in order for us to see the actual change that we hope to realize in this moment for all of us, we have to also recognize the failures that have led us to this moment. And, you know, especially politicians and community groups that have been addressing this issue. One of our biggest challenges that, and this is I would say the trend in the civil rights movement, and Dr. King talked about this specifically, it's always been about wait. They've always said, wait, let's look at this, let's wait. And we can't wait anymore. We know that what is happening right now is absolutely horrendous. And we're seeing it played out. We saw it the moment Jamar Clark was killed. And now with George Floyd, we saw exactly how the system is set up to protect killer cops. The system is there, never budging, only putting on little Band-Aids that have never been able to systematically change the issues that we've been dealing with. And we know, even in that moment, the racial bias that exists very clearly in all of the aspects of the criminal justice system. And I think, as Mel mentioned, you know, I personally believe both political parties have failed us miserably. That does not mean that we have to completely just think that we can't do something about that. We can do something about that. But most importantly, I would say, and I want to get back to those concrete points. I mean, these concrete points that are in this document are planned to create an independent organization that will investigate police officers, having insurance for police officers, changing all of these trainings that create these officers to kill, you know, the militarization that exists in policing in this country. And even just, you know, just before they even become police officers, and I've spoken to criminal justice professors, some who are even leaving the education field because they just felt like nobody's interested in addressing these issues from even the onset. The people who are deciding to become police officers they're not even being required to learn about de-escalation, learn about the type of day-to-day type of incidents that they have to respond to. So that said, you know, you have to go back and recognize that we have issues at the state level, we have issues at the federal level, we have issues at the city level, we have issues at the county level, and all of these systems have been there to support each other and to protect each other. I mean, think about it. We've had countless national policies that have been pushed on the state policies that have criminalized being Black in this country. Literally criminalized being Black in this country. And then the overwhelming demand for more policing, and using statistics to terrorize our community. So when we peel back the onion, we're now looking at, there's a lot. And that's one of the things that I'm really concerned about right now. And I think Nekima mentioned it earlier, that you know, there are people who want to say, here's just one answer. Here's what we're going to do. And many of those people who are presenting these ideas are the same politicians who failed us when Jamar Clark was killed, failed us when Philando Castile was killed. And if we don't recognize those failures, we will continue to keep making them. But the one thing I want to say specifically to our white allies, this is the moment to realize that you cannot turn away, and you have to recognize the voices that have been talking about these issues, the voices that have been addressing these issues, and realize that you need to be able to demand the type of change that we want. And I think Minnesota, we have this, you know, passive aggressive society, which is extremely dangerous and avoids real conflict, real conversations to talk about the pain that exists in our society. You don't have to go anywhere else to find the disparities that exist, that have all been legislated. Disparities have been legislated through redlining in this country, through the type of economic aspects of this country. So I think this is a moment to realize that we can only do better if we all try to recognize that we need to be part of the solution. This is not just a police issue. The police are, as I always say, the brutal force of the system. But the reality is today, the police show up in our schools, they show up at our grocery stores, they show up in our apartments, they show up at our events. They're just that brutal force that you can find almost in every single location. But think about it, historically in this country, whenever we had these moments and the community is organized, just like Black Lives Matter and many other movements that have been happening in this country, think about what the government does. They go back in and create programs to surveil our communities, programs to undermine our leadership, programs to undermine any positive change. And don't be fooled that in this moment right now that they're not working toward that. They're going to work to discredit the leaders of this community. They're going to work to try to undermine everything that we're trying to do right now. And they're going to offer some band-aid solutions that are going to fix the problem. This is the pattern that we have lived in. And that's why in this moment, if we don't realize what happened, why we failed, we're going to repeat the same mistakes over and over. What happened to the Black Panthers? COINTELPRO, they literally used community members to dismantle efforts to change accountability in this country. And we're right back to it. We just had a program called Countering Violence Extremism that targeted Muslims. Guess what? Now it's moved. Now it's targeting Black people in this country. And on top of it, and these are the type of government programs you don't hear about, most of people don't hear about, and they're specifically targeting any effort of those people on the front lines who have been demanding for change. And so there's a lot to learn in this moment, but we cannot also in this moment celebrate little wins that have no real impact on the larger scale. And the more we realize, the more we unpeel the onion, we realize there's a lot of work to be done in everywhere. Finally, and I hate to take so much air here, but I want to just also recognize the role media play and Hollywood. We always think about the role that some of these specific industries play, but Hollywood has been the biggest guilty party that has built a stereotype of people of color in this country and threatened the lives of people all over this country. In fact, most people never have a critical thought when they're watching entertainment in this country. It's just the nature of it. We have never demanded that industry to change, and we need to demand that as part of this movement right now. In addition to it is the local media and the media. Think about it. What is the last time you watch a local news? They've demonized Black people in this country. They demonize the Black man in this country. They always start with the criminal report. They only do drive-by media. And they're right now at 38th in Chicago, and they're not covering the real story of the young people protecting our streets. They're not covering the stories that we want them to be covered because they've become a business first. This is not an entity that's interested in true journalism. And that's why in these moments right now, we also have to support efforts like, the Minnesota Spokesman-Recorder, Unicorn Riots, many of the wonderful local and media efforts that are happening in our community today. So I want to really emphasize, this is a system that has to be dismantled. It's not just one piece of the puzzle, and we need everybody in this moment.
Thank you so much, Jaylani, for that. I want to connect now with Oluchi. We hear a lot about the work that is being done in the community. We have several organizations that are coming from different angles, but are really coming towards the same goal at this point, which is public safety, the sparing and of Black bodies in Minnesota and beyond. And I would like to get your perspective on what defunding really looks like in the community, and how different do you think it is, or do you think it's that different as related to the 44 recommendations that were laid out earlier this week by Communities United Against Police Brutality and CAIR and other organizations? And really, what are the similarities, and how can we come together from these different angles to push for the same goal?
Yeah, that's a good question. Also, I apologize, I do have to leave in a little bit. I thought that
okay, thank you.
Also, we love to talk, niggas love to talk. So, yeah, so I think first to start with similarities, I think that we can all agree that Black people deserve to be free and safe in America. If we don't agree on that, I'm sorry, we can't be comrades. But I think that we all think that Black people deserve to be safe and have autonomy over their lives here and everywhere in the world. As far as the differences, the reasons why I don't like the recommendations that CUAPB and CAIR have lifted up is because more training, sensitivity training, more experience actually is funding the police more. You're actually giving them more money to go through these trainings, which is the exact opposite of what we're calling for, right? Is we're calling to take money from the police budget and actually invest that in our communities communities, right? Into the Black Broadway that Nekima was talking about, right? How do we actually invest in Black businesses, invested in Black education? How many Black teachers do you all know that work at North High, that work in any like high school in the Minneapolis area, right? So I think those are the differences, is that like calling for more specifics of the police department actually doesn't actually create systemic change within the police department at all. And I wanted to push back on what Jaylani said, because Jaylani said this is a small win and we shouldn't celebrate. I want folks to know that Minneapolis was at the epicenter of a global uprising, and a global uprising that was not calling for police accountability, that was not calling for the convictions. Those were small wins. What folks were saying on the ground was that we have to shift, dramatically shift the systems that we live under in this moment. That is not a small win. That is not a small win, regardless of what anyone says. We have folks that are 12 years old that are calling for the defunding of the police department. We have Miss Major, who is a 70-year-old veteran from the Stonewall riots, who says for the first time in a long time, she has felt hopeful about the future of Black people. That is not, I repeat, that is not a small win. So I think that in this moment, we really have to listen to the folks who are actually allowing us to envision a world in which we don't rely on police. And I don't think that's happening on a level that folks need it to, because what we're thinking about is we're thinking that like, oh, this thing can never be replaced. We have to have police. What is this or that? But we're not thinking about alternative institutions. And we're also not thinking about what does personal transformation look like to get to a liberated world. Understanding that just because we get rid of the police department, it does not mean that racism is all of a sudden gone. It does not mean that capitalism is all of a sudden gone, right? We have to understand that like all of us have anti-Black rhetoric inside of us regardless, because we are conditioned under white supremacy. So what is the work that we need to do, and how can community support that work in order for us to live in a more liberated world? And I think that's, as far as like values, I never will ever think that any Black person is disposable, right? I don't think that Chief Arredondo was disposable. I do not agree with his profession, and I will never agree with his profession, but I do not think that Black people are disposable. But I do think that we have the same underlying values of community, of safety, of love, of self-autonomy, right? And how do we actually create a world in which all of us are truly self-autonomous? Because I don't think that that's going to happen living under a police state or living under capitalism in the ways that we do right now.
Thank you so much. Before you go, I do want to just ask you for one action item that you can give our viewers when they log off today. We're doing a lot of talking. What's one action item they can do?
Yeah, for me, I really, really want to emphasize the need for political education and public education, right? I very, very much so strongly believe that everyone should read Angela Davis's Our Prisons Obsolete. Like, that book is like literally everything that you need to read. If you're not a reader, folks don't read. Some people don't read. Watch the 13th Amendment documentary on Netflix. And also just like organize with your community. This would never have happened, and it wouldn't have blown up in the ways that it did if we did not have community and amazing Black community here, regardless of how different we are or the different political views that we hold. Because of the Black community here and the work that we did with Jamar Clark, we had the ability to do that. So organizing your communities, organize your families. I know that this is literally the hardest thing that anyone can ever ask for anyone to do, but talk to your family members around why abolition is necessary in order for us to gain liberation. And those are the small things that you can do after you log out. Just throw some coin to some organizations. I mean, NAACP is here, throw some coins to them, throw some coins to Black Visions, invest in intersectional organizations as well, folks that are led by Black women, folks that are led by Black queer folks, right? And invest in Black communities in your area.
Okay. Thank you so much, Oluchi. Everyone, Oluchi Omeoga. Did I say your last name right? Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you, Oluchi Omeoga with Black Visions Collective. And now I want to pivot a little bit and talk to Council President or Council Vice President, apologies, Andrea Jenkins. we are hearing a lot about a system that failed us, elected officials that failed us. And I know you yourself made history with your position right now, being elected to the council and being able to make change. And then also, again, history with the decision a couple of days ago to publicly commit to defunding the police. What do you say now what do you say your role is right now, and how can you help us move past this idea of being failed, and how can we help you to move forward with change?
Yeah, this is a fascinating conversation. I agree with much of what has been said, particularly the fact that I think we all share very similar goals, and that is the liberation of our people. And that is why I stepped into the political realm 20 years ago as a policy aide, and then stood up to be elected in 2018 to try and effectuate change in our communities, Everybody has noted that the white supremacy and racism, systemic institutional racism, is deeply rooted in the foundations of every single institution in our culture and society. So yeah, if this was easy, when I got elected, I would have waved my magic wand and all of this shit would have been ended. This is not easy. There are forces. Yeah, people are not just waiting for me to come and bless them with the truth and reality, and then all of a sudden they're going to change their ways. And even if we get the Minneapolis, I read over the CUABP, APB recommendations. Over half of them, the city of Minneapolis, we have no control over. It's gonna take state changes, legislative changes, federal government changes to the federal constitution. Some of these things are being worked on, and that's great. And I have to echo Oluchi's comments that there have been wins. And maybe this might be a moment to remind everybody, but I know people don't really care, but we are just a little over 2 weeks and 2 days since George Floyd was murdered. Since then, the day after, 4 officers were fired, unheard of. 1 officer was charged and arrested, unheard of. Prosecutorial venue was changed from the county attorney to the state attorney general. The Minneapolis Police Department was sued by the state of human rights. This is all in a matter of 2 weeks. That's unprecedented. That's victories that these young people marching on our streets have made a reality. And I do think that's worth celebrating, that we have been able to push this system here locally, but nationally, people all over the country. And because this is not just the Minneapolis problem, This is a systemic issue with police departments around the entire country. There is an entire set of people who are determined to keep their knee on our neck. If I could make them get it off, I would do that in a heartbeat. But I got to work with each and every one of you to do that work. And so the one thing that I would ask people to do is vote. Vote me out if you think somebody else can do this better. Step up and run for office if you think you can do it better. Please, that's what's gonna be needed to change this system. We are in a moment. We have a really, there's been a confluence of actions and just circumstances. The murder of George Floyd happened in the midst of a global pandemic. So everybody's sitting at home. So everybody watched this. This gave people the time and the impetus to come out and protest this issue. And now we have this perfect storm, the lawsuit from the state Human Rights Department, which says now we can try to change some of these issues with the union. We can begin to change some of the systemic issues at the legislature that has been restrictive to making changes in our city, in our policing structures. Excuse me, and I'm asking each and every one of you to please get involved with these efforts, bring your ideas, bring your, not everybody is gonna agree with all the 44 points that Citizens United for Police Brutality bring forward. Not everybody is gonna agree with all the issues and concerns that the Black Visions Collective bring forward. But I think we can all come together as community and come to consensus on what a new public safety mechanism looks like in our community. One that addresses mental health concerns, one that addresses domestic violence concerns, one that really helps our schools to be safer environments without armed police officers patrolling our schools, preparing our kids to go through this prison industrial complex that is a part of capitalism, which Mel Reeves named it up front. I mean, the police department was born out of capitalism to protect the property that was Black bodies that were owned to create wealth for white people. Those laws haven't changed very much since then, other than to crack down on us as Black bodies even further. So we got to get involved in this effort, and we got to vote. Those are the two messages that I want to leave.
Thank you so much, Council Vice President Jenkins. What I'm hearing from everyone on this panel is that we, coming from different viewpoints, but we're all coming for the same thing. We're still coming for public safety. We're still coming for the freeing of Black bodies. We're coming for, at the end of the day, just equity in the state. So Mel, I would love for you to chime in with your work on this from the civil rights aspect, but also as within Black media on that conversation.
Can you hear me?
Yes, there we go.
Okay. Let me bring the conversation back. I think that somebody talked about, let's be clear about some things. One, Sister O was right. I can't pronounce her well, so I always say Sister
Oluchi.
She's right. This was a win. What we, around the country, around the world, people have come out in the street. We got the cops to do something. We got the system to do something they didn't want to do. They didn't want to charge the first cop to begin with. They definitely didn't want to charge the other four. They didn't want to charge them with second degree. So they got pushed. Keith Ellison stood up and said that they didn't charge all 4 cops because of the protest. That's just not true. And the only reason they charged them wasn't because of the protest. And now people are still in the street. And so this is a win. We've got people who push past their programming. I say to people, white people who push past their programming that said we're superior and those people are inferior and we don't have anything coming. People have pushed past it, so we're winning. And so nobody's more radical than I am on some level in this town. Nobody's been revolutionary longer than I have on some level, very few. And so let me say this. I don't try to criticize folks who have a different opinion than me because I think like this. And I know everybody took a part in this thing. Nekima talked about how, and Leslie talked about how they came out and they defended the community, right? Because white supremacists was coming in. My sisters at Black Visions came up with an idea of defunding the police. And well, you know, that will help on some level. Even if you defund the police, the money they have left, they'll still use to hire cops to brutalize us. But they're right. Some of the money can be used on housing, education. We agree. That's a good thing. And I'm not gonna beat up anybody for having that perspective. Michelle Gross, those guys put out some recommendations that made sense. Why don't the cops carry their own liability? Why did they get rid of the Civilian Review Board, right? Which could have held somebody accountable. On some level, the system shows that it's corrupt because they never hold themselves accountable. You know, every time something happens, and you heard the cops in New York, you know, in the press conference saying, well, we're not like that. That was an aberration, one bad apple. But the problem with that is they keep talking about bad apples, but if I got a bad apple in a bunch, I get rid of the bad apple. So the system exposes itself by continuing to say things that aren't true. Even Chief Arredondo, who's a likable guy, has not been getting rid of people who have complaints against them, right? I mean, we just talked about the ground stuff. So all the work that we're doing is going to be helpful. At the end of the day, as I keep pointing out, we're going to, I think, and everybody's in agreement that we want to end the system of policing as we know it. I think we can agree on that. That's what everybody has different ways to go. Some people say defund it. Some people say, well, let's get them to do the right thing. But we want to get rid of the police system as we know it. That's why people in the street, that's why people in the street all over Europe, they recognize that something is evil here. Have you noticed that even while people were protesting police violence, the police are still being violent? I wrote about it, I blogged about it, and it'll probably be on the Spokesman page as well. You can see it on my Facebook page. But the police are still being violent because it's the nature of the police department. And now we force concessions because in the past when they were violent, you realize that reporters have lost eyes. Last count, 7 human beings in this country have lost an eye, and they were all just protesting peacefully. Not one of them was attacking a cop. A young lady was kneeling down. You all saw this, and a white cop, kicked her in her back. And the only time I've seen any cop actually confront another cop was in Fort Lauderdale, where the Black woman cop ran up on the dude and grabbed him. And now they charged him because now they realize they're under pressure, and the protest is important because it's putting pressure on. So let me wrap up by saying that everybody has a piece of this thing, yes. Right? It's a waste of time for us to take apart everybody's thing. I don't waste my time doing that. If I disagree, I just move on. I just do what I think I need to be doing. My job, so I wear 2 hats, obviously, but as an activist, my job is always to point people, young people and anybody else, to the big picture. My job is to say, look, if they keep doing something over and over again, it's because it's who they are. My niece always says, when somebody tells you who they are, believe them. We just saw during the pandemic, they called our mothers and fathers and aunts and uncles and relatives essential workers, right? But then they put them out. They were so essential that they decided not to give them personal protective. How can they be essential if you won't protect them? They wouldn't even protect the people on the medical front line. That tells you that this is a very, very corrupt system. And even what's been really sharp about this too is that people have seen past the whole Trump trick. They're not calling out Trump. You see very few rallies where they talk about putting out Trump because they recognize that this is deeper than Trump. Trump doesn't run Amazon. Trump does not run Amazon, right? But Amazon had people working in their factory with coronavirus and they were dying. Trump doesn't run Kroger or some of the other department stores that ask the workers not to wear masks. Anyway, this is a system that's corrupt. And at the end of the day, we've got to change it. But anything in the middle that helps make life better, any recommendation that keeps the cop from hitting somebody in the head with a stick, that's a good thing, right? If we take money from the police department and spend it in the community, that's a good thing. but we know we can't stop there. We've got to push past it ultimately and get rid of the system of policing as we know it. And we can't do that, get rid of the system that requires it. So I hope that ties it together for you. Everybody is doing a part of the job. And one more thing, Stephenetta, before I go. So if we push the cops out, there are some concessions that we can get. And everybody else went a little long, so bear with me. We've been talking about community response teams. Nekima has talked about this. Community response teams where instead of the cops responding to somebody in a mental health crisis, we have a community group that responds. We have our own health counselors. Also, domestic violence situations get people arrested and beat up. Instead of having the police respond, we can have our own community response team. And lastly, we can now, we can push the thing because they're backing up. We can push them to stop locking folks up for using drugs. That's a health problem. And now we can demand, speaking of community stuff, we can demand treatment centers. Yes, we can. Don't y'all forget this. We can get some stuff. So speaking of reform, there's reforms and there's revolution. Ultimately, we're gonna need to change this whole thing. But in the meantime, those things I just named will save a whole lot of lives.
Thank you so much, Mel. I know everyone here is impassioned and passionate and tired. I mean, we're all tired. That's why we're here today, right? So thank you so much. I know we are running on time. You know, Black folk, we talk and we like to, and we're gonna go just a little bit longer because I do want to make sure that you give us actionable items. We understand this pandemic. We understand that there's a global perspective to this, but we're also, you are also in Minnesota right now at the epicenter. You are ground zero of this change. And so what can our viewers, what can our readers, what can people who are in the streets right now marching, what can they do at this very moment to push the button and move the needle forward? And I'm gonna start with Nekima here.
I think that the people on the ground need to do what we've been doing for the last 5 going on 6 years and continue taking to the streets, continue demanding justice, continue getting in the faces of our elected officials from the local level with every member of city council to the mayor, to the county level, to our governor and all the people in his administration. Because as I said before, all of these people have failed us. And I know that, you know, we want to rush to, you know, excitement of what's next, what's next. I'm still looking at the harm that was caused from the fact that they were complicit with the ways in which Minneapolis Police Department has been harming Black people for years. And all of the times that we showed up at City Hall, met one-on-one with people, and they frankly didn't give a damn. I've heard it being saying we need to vote, we need to run for office. Well, I did run for office as a Black woman on a police accountability platform. And the challenges of trying to break through, you know, all of the white supremacy, the cliques, everything else that tries to deny us access to political power definitely had an impact. But I would encourage people, you know, elections are coming up, of course, November, but next year as well. We need to replace many of our elected officials at all of these levels and get people from our community to run who are going to have the best interests of the community in mind. We don't have time for people middle of the road, making excuses, playing games, because that's how we got here. So I encourage people continue taking to the streets. We have a rally tomorrow, 5 o'clock at the Government Center. We have a rally on Friday at the Police Federation headquarters that's focused on Bob Crow must go. There's something on Saturday at the Government Center. We're going to keep pounding the pavement until this whole damn system changes, because this whole damn system is right. I'm not coddling nobody. I'm not making no excuses. I know the sacrifices that we made to get here. So yeah, it is a win, but it also should have been a no-brainer. The stuff we're sitting here sacrificing and fighting for should have been happened 5 years ago with Jamar Clark. But people sat on their hands, pretending they had no power. And this is now we see yet another Black life being taken. So I am fed up. I'm gonna continue calling out every elected official who I know failed us and who didn't listen. And I'm gonna continue pushing our community to stand up for ourselves, because we deserve all of the justice that we can handle, not just for us, but for our babies, as well as future generations.
And I want to just to add to that, and I want to also conceptualize, we have a unique opportunity because of this moment. And I think we need to set our standards as high as possible, because I think that's what the great leaders of the civil rights movement have always set. And so in this moment right now, we need to fully overhaul this entire system. And it requires all of us, and all of our ideas I personally believe are coming from the pain that we feel. And in this moment right now, we can have more people in this movement. And I think it's critical in this moment right now that we do the most we can possibly do. And that means some seriously radical, as Mel said, revolutionary ideas. And so the question really is just us. The real question is to us individually. And I want to be very specific about that. Every single one of us at home, wherever you're at, this is a moment for you to realize that you have power, you have an ability to change, and you can organize your family, you can organize your community, and you need to demand for this full change, a complete change of this system. Because as I said, it's layered, it is stacked. Wherever you see, there's a system that is there backing the other system. And that's unfortunate, but that's the reality we live in. And that's why I want, and I'm demanding for full and real change. What is the one actionable item that I think many people can do today? The first and most important thing, just show up. Show up to these protests. You will learn, you will build, you will connect with others, you will hear the stories and the pain of the families, you'll understand what we need to do, and you will also see the visibility of what's going on. And if you cannot be out here with us, join us, amplify our voices, and you could do a lot of things at home. Join the movement, join these organizations, become a volunteer, learn the issues, and do not believe that we are going to make a change in a day. We're going to need a lot of days. But right now, in this moment, we have the power. The people have the power. And I think that is the greatest victory that we have so far. The people have the power. But the question we have to do is, what do we do with this power? And right now, there are competing ideas about particular things. But at the end of the day, what I personally believe is they're not competing. Because at the end of the day, it's going to get us to the moment where we need to be at. So if you're a white person in Minnesota, this is our moment right now. We can lead the nation in transforming and completely changing this system. And wherever you look, it's there. And it's not just in Minneapolis and St. Paul. It's all over this country, as others have said. It's everywhere. And if we can fix it here, and we can be a light for the rest of the world and the rest of this country, we can show how it can happen. And this moment, we can't fail. And that's what really I fear the most, is that we lose another opportunity to do something great. I personally believe we lost many opportunities because a lot of people didn't join this movement, but I believe now people have joined, and I think now we can really make true change. So it's about us, it's about you individually, and together we can make those differences happen.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go to Andrea Jenkins right now. Thank you. Same question.
Thanks, Stephenetta.
Thank you.
I don't really have time to call people names or try to denigrate people's intentions or motives. And everybody on this call is a human being, and we are all fall short of what other people think we should be doing. So, with that said, I haven't changed my my response to this question from the last time I answered it. People need to vote, and people need to get involved in the process of reimagining what our systems that we live under can look like. And initially, we're going to start with the police department and public safety. Then we're going to move on to homelessness, to affordable housing. We have to get access to affordable health care that is not tied to a job. We need to make sure people are making enough money to be able to live in an apartment. If you work 8 hours a day, you should be able to afford to pay rent. You know, I'm gonna keep doing the things that I've been doing to try to make this a better place for Black and brown people to live. And I hope that everybody else will too. And I'm gonna have to jump off this call. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to the community. I hope everybody stays safe out there. Remember, we are still in the midst of a global health pandemic. There's testing that's available for people over the next few weeks. Please take access to that and stay safe out there.
Thank you so much, Council Vice President Jenkins. Your words are very much appreciated. Your support is appreciated. I would also encourage the community to get up and show up, pull up, shut up at this moment in time. Show up at the City Council meeting, show up and support when the council, when the state, when any elected official calls you for help and assistance. I encourage you to show up. And then now I'm going to bring, I'm going to bring in Leslie Redmond back with the NAACP to give us some actionable items. One good thing we can move from this conversation today.
I think I'll just go back to what I said before about listening to Black women, listening to Black people overall, not just the ones that you want to listen to, not just when it's convenient to listen to us. Yeah, I think we're moving in the right direction. I think we just need to keep moving, just stay focused, pour money into Black businesses, pour money into Black organizations. This is going to really be a defining moment where we move into gentrification and allow people to take over our communities, or we take over our communities. And a lot of that is going to be based in who we are supporting and how we are supporting. When it comes to the NAACP, you all know we have monthly meetings. Follow us on social media, NAACP, NPLS. My social media is my name on here, Leslie E. Redmond. We have a GoFundMe up right now. You definitely want to donate to that GoFundMe. You definitely want to share that GoFundMe. Talk about tangible. That's a very tangible way. We are actually trying to raise $500,000, and we have now 9 days by Juneteenth. That is an ambitious goal, but I think that it is a necessary goal, and I think that it can be achieved if everybody pours in. We are trying to create a sustainable patrol and protection company that can be an extension of what we've already been doing, where we can hire Black brothers and sisters to protect and patrol our own communities. And so I'm really excited. I don't think there's anything that we cannot do. God has given us this moment, and it's just time for us to activate.
Thank you so much, Leslie. I just want to thank everyone who tuned in, who joined this panel today. I'm honored that you were all able to jump on this call to share your perspectives, to give us new perspectives and new action items on how we move forward. Again, my name is Stephenetta Harmon. I'm with the Minnesota Spokesman-Recorder, and we look forward to continuing these discussions, having these conversations, and being able to shine the light on the Black Minnesota perspective. Thank you so much.